with my member at a future date.
Well done,
Resuming debate. Please, the débat. The honourable member for Regina, Wascana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to begin my speech this morning with a movie review, if I may. The movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. It's widely considered to be James Cameron's masterpiece. It won 11 Oscars and brought in $2 billion at the box office. Of course, I am talking about Titanic. One of the most memorable scenes from that movie is when the ship is first coming up on the iceberg and the lookout yells, "Iceberg, right ahead." All of a sudden, the captain and the crew, they spring into action and they reverse the engines and they turn the wheel and the rudder as hard as they can to try and save the ship from hitting the iceberg. But unfortunately, it was too late, and the ship crashes into the iceberg and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Mr. Speaker, historians have long agreed that if the lookout had seen the iceberg just a few seconds earlier, the ship could have turned in time and the disaster could have been avoided. Now imagine for a minute, Mr. Speaker, if instead of seeing the iceberg only 1 or 2 minutes before the crash, imagine if they had seen the iceberg 10 years in advance. How would events have turned out differently? First of all, it wouldn't have made for a very good movie. If they could see the iceberg from miles and miles away, then presumably it would be pretty easy to avoid crashing into it. But Mr. Speaker, 10 years is how much warning the Liberal government has had about the dangers of Justin Trudeau's reckless spending and the continuation of those reckless policies under this current Prime Minister for the past 6 months. But it wasn't always like this. A generation ago, the Chrétien Martin Liberals used to be the party of fiscal responsibility. Former Finance Minister Paul Martin once said that the Liberal government would balance the budget come hell or high water. They made some tough choices in the 1990s, but eventually they balanced the books because they understood that a nation cannot spend its way into prosperity with money it doesn't have. Conservatives may have disagreed with some of the decisions that were made along the way, but on the core principle of fiscal responsibility, there was support from both parties. Unfortunately, in more recent times, Justin Trudeau has said that the budget would balance itself. Then in 2015, he said that the Liberals would run 3 small deficits for 3 short years, and then the budget would be balanced. Fast forward to December of 2024, when the Liberals were to present their fall economic statement. By that time, their deficit had ballooned to a figure of $62 billion, an amount so embarrassing that the finance minister chose to resign that morning instead of facing the embarrassment that would inevitably come with a deficit so massive and out of control. And so that raises the question, how much is the deficit in 2025? Sadly, no one knows, because the Liberal government, until this point, has procrastinated, postponed, and delayed the tabling of a budget, and has continued to sail full steam ahead as though nothing was the matter. But we did get a glimpse recently from the Parliamentary Budget Officer when he testified before the Government Operations and Estimates Committee. He described this government's finances as, quote, unsustainable. He went on to say, quote, "This is not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. We don't lightly use the words unsustainable. Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done," unquote. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer might as well have stood up and yelled, "Iceberg right ahead." Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government needs to change course before they crash the ship into the iceberg. But unfortunately, the current captain of the ship is continuing on the same course that Justin Trudeau had us on. And Mr. Speaker, we're already seeing the harms caused to our economy and to our standard of living. In 2015, the Liberals said that their deficit spending would lead to investment. But 10 years later, investment per worker has fallen by 10%. The burden of debts and deficits on our economy over the last 10 years has caused us to have the worst per capita economic growth rate in the G7. Since taking office earlier this year, under the current Prime Minister's watch, 86,000 net jobs have been lost, leaving Canada with the second highest unemployment rate in the G7. Food inflation has doubled. In fact, in a recent report from Food Banks Canada, this government received a failing grade when it comes to food insecurity, down from a C grade just 2 years ago. Since this Prime Minister took over 6 months ago, $54 billion in net investment has left the country. And without investments in new factory equipment, new farm machinery, and new businesses, the productivity of the Canadian worker and the standard of living of Canadians will continue to decline. Mr. Speaker, another unfortunate part about the Liberals' massive, out-of-control deficits is that the numbers have gotten so big that it's difficult for people to understand just how big they are. When the price you pay at the grocery store or at the gas pump or at your favorite restaurant goes up, people understand right away how much money that actually is. That's because people make these purchases all the time, and we notice when a tank of gas or our favorite meal costs more than before. But when we're talking about the size of the federal deficit, that number is so huge that it almost becomes meaningless to ordinary people. That is especially true when the Liberals refuse to table a budget and hide how much the deficit actually is. But for argument's sake, let's take the $62 billion deficit from last December's fall economic statement. How much is $62 billion? How big an amount of money does that look like? Well, Mr. Speaker, the largest denomination of banknote issued by the Bank of Canada is the $100 bill. If you were to go down to the bank and go to the ATM machine and withdraw $62 billion in $100 bills, that would be 620 million $100 bills. Now, each $100 bill is about 0.1 millimeters thick. So that means if you were to stack those 620 million $100 bills, one on top of another, that stack would reach 62 kilometers high. Or put another way, that's about 7 times the height of Mount Everest. Or if you were to use $10 bills, you would have 70 Mount Everests. If you used rolls of toonies, you'd have enough toonies to wrap around the entire planet. If the rolls were loonies, you'd have enough loonies to wrap around the entire planet twice. Now, fortunately, pennies have been taken out of circulation, so I will stop my analogies there, but I hope that I have made the point about the enormity of this economic iceberg that Canada is sailing into. The Liberal Titanic may have gotten a new captain last winter, but the course that was charted 10 years ago under Justin Trudeau has not changed. We are still sailing straight into an Everest-sized economic iceberg. It is time to change course, and so I encourage members today to support the Conservatives' motion. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to the questions.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, if that iceberg analogy was to be used, you could use it in Canada, as you just did, United States, England, in fact, any of the G7 countries. And what you'll find, Mr. Speaker, is that when it comes to net to GDP debt ratio or deficit ratio, Canada is the lowest in the entire G7. So the member kind of makes the point that I was trying to get earlier. As Conservatives try to make Canada as if it's broken, and I think Canadians sent us a very strong message back in April that they want us to work together to build a strong Canada. I'm wondering if he could provide his thoughts on the other G6 countries in terms of their debt compared to the Iceberg.
Honourable Member for Regina, Wascana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this reminds me of the elementary school student who comes home with an F on his report card, and he says to his mom and dad, "Yeah, but other kids flunk their report cards too." I mean, that doesn't mean that you're doing a good job just because you can point out to someone who has just as bad a record as you. It is true that governments around the world have struggled with reining in unnecessary spending, but that is no comfort to Canadians struggling to make ends meet, struggling with the cost of groceries, struggling to pay rent. You know, the fact that other countries are having similar problems is cold comfort, and it should be no excuse to this government to not get our fiscal house in order.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the Liberals would have you believe that everything is great in Canada. If you listen to them, they constantly are promoting their big projects window that they've put in place, and then they talk about LNG Canada. Well, I would like to point out, Mr. Speaker, that when the Liberals came to power, there were 14 applications for LNG plants across this country. In the last 10 years, only one of those has been built. I'm wondering if my honourable colleague has some comments to that effect.
Honourable Member for Regina, Wascana.
Yes, I would like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. There is nothing more frustrating when world leaders from Germany and Greece and Poland and other countries say, "Hey, we would like to buy Canadian oil and gas so we can stop buying from Russia, so we can stop buying from dictators in the Middle East." And the response from this government is there is no business case for oil and gas exports to Europe or to our other allies around the world. There's nothing more frustrating when you have all these economic opportunities literally sitting underneath our feet, but the Liberals keep making up excuses about why we should not be developing our resources and why we should not be making life better for Canadians. And it would be wonderful if we could get these opportunities and projects off the ground to make life better, not only for Canadians, but for our allies around the world.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we've heard a lot about fiscal irresponsibility and all that from both of the last two speakers. But I would just like to ask our colleagues to explain that if that's the case, if indeed Canada is a basket case, as they say, how is it that we still have a AAA credit rating?
For Regina, Wascana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting how the Liberals keep moving the goalposts. I remember when Paul Martin was Prime Minister, the goalposts were to balance the budget come hell or high water. And then a few years later, they said, well, we're not going to balance the budget, but it'll be a function of GDP. We'll keep it under so many percentage of GDP. And now they're talking about saying, well, we're going to separate the deficits between operational deficits and fixed assets, or whatever the term was. It's so frustrating when we are sailing straight towards this iceberg and we're sailing straight towards a $62 billion deficit, and the Liberals try and play this bait and switch game and try to move the goalpost. It's time for the Liberals to take some responsibility for the fiscal mess that we're in and turn this ship around. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat.